Let's begin with something uncomfortable, something most people spend their entire lives avoiding because the truth of it feels too cold to sit with. Look closely at the people who populate your life, the coworkers you eat lunch with, the acquaintances who fill your social calendar, even many you casually call friends, and ask yourself honestly what actually binds you together. In the vast majority of cases, the answer isn't loyalty. It isn't unconditional commitment. It's circumstance, proximity, shared benefit, the simple, unglamorous fact that your lives happen to intersect in a way that currently convenient for both parties. And convenience by its very nature is temporary. This isn't a claim about human wickedness. It's a claim about human architecture. Most relationships are built, whether we admit it or not, on a foundation of mutual utility. You work together, so you're friendly. You live near each other, so you socialize. You move in the same circles, attend the same events, share the same interests. And from this shared context, something that feels like friendship emerges. But feeling like friendship and being tested as friendship are two entirely different things. And the difference between them only becomes visible once the convenience that created the relationship disappears. Change jobs, move cities, lose the status or resource that made you useful to the group, and watch how quickly certain relationships reveal themselves for what they always were. Arrangements, not attachments. This is where most people make their critical error, not in forming these convenience-based connections, which are natural and often perfectly pleasant, but in misreading what they actually are. They mistake the warmth of a shared context for the depth of genuine loyalty. They assume that because someone has been pleasant, present, even generous within the boundaries of a convenient arrangement, that same person would remain equally present once the arrangement dissolved. This assumption is rarely tested until circumstances force the test upon you, and by then, the damage of misplaced trust has often already been done. Consider how this plays out practically. The colleague who was your closest ally at the company vanishes from your life entirely. This moment you're no longer co-workers, and you're left wondering what happened when nothing happened at all. The relationship simply lost the infrastructure that was holding it together because the connection was never independent of that infrastructure to begin with. The social circle that embraced you while you held a certain status, income, or usefulness begins to quietly recede the moment that status changes. This isn't betrayal in the dramatic sense we usually imagine. It's simply the removal of the load-bearing wall that the entire relationship was built upon. The wall was never loyalty. It was proximity, benefit, convenience. And once that wall comes down, there was never anything else holding the structure up. Here's the deeper principle worth understanding. Loyalty and convenience are not the same currency, and treating them as interchangeable is precisely what leaves people blindsided. Convenience-based relationships are not inherently dishonest or malicious. Most people participating in them aren't consciously calculating anything. We're simply behaving according to what's easy, and what's easy shifts as circumstances shift. The mistake isn't in having these relationships. Everyone does, and everyone needs them. They make up the fabric of ordinary social life. The mistake is in failing to correctly categorize them, in expecting the resilience of true loyalty from a bond that was only ever built to withstand convenience. This requires a specific kind of clarity that most people resist developing because it feels, at first glance, like cynicism. It isn't. It's simply accurate categorization. Not every person in your life needs to be evaluated as a potential lifelong ally, and not every pleasant interaction needs to be mistrusted. What's required is the discipline to notice which relationships have actually been tested by inconvenience, sacrifice, or the absence of mutual benefit, and which have simply never been tested at all, because circumstances have never demanded it. Until that test occurs, you genuinely don't know which category a relationship belongs to. Assuming loyalty in the absence of evidence isn't optimism. It's a failure to distinguish between what's comfortable and what's proven. So here's what I want you to carry forward. The ease of a relationship tells you almost nothing about its depth, only its behavior under pressure, its endurance once benefit disappears, its presence once convenience is gone. Only that tells you what you're actually dealing with. Most people never ask this question until they're forced to, and by then, the answer arrives as a wound rather than as information they could have used all along. Don't wait for circumstance to reveal what convenience was covering. Look now, honestly, at what's actually holding your relationships together, and prepare yourself accordingly for the ones that were never built to survive its absence. Let's push further into territory that makes most people uncomfortable, not because it's false, but because we've been trained our entire lives to look away from it. Every relationship you've ever had, including the ones closest to your heart, contains an element of self-interest. Not greed, not manipulation necessarily, simply the basic human reality that people engage with you, at least in part, because of what that engagement provides them: companionship, validation, comfort, advantage, meaning. This isn't a flaw hidden in a few bad actors. It's the operating system running beneath virtually all human connection, and refusing to see it doesn't make it any less true. It only makes you less prepared for what it means. I want to be precise about what I'm saying here, because it's easily misunderstood as a bleak verdict on human nature. It isn't. Self-interest is not the opposite of love, loyalty, or genuine care. It coexists with those things constantly. A parent who finds deep purpose in raising a child is still, on some level, fulfilling a need of their own, for meaning, for legacy, for connection. A friend who shows up for you during a crisis is still, in some part of themselves, reinforcing their own identity as someone loyal, someone good, someone who shows up. This doesn't cheapen the friendship. It simply means the exchange was never purely selfless to begin with. Because pure selflessness, stripped of any personal stake whatsoever, is closer to a philosophical ideal than an observable human behavior. The danger isn't the self-interest itself. The danger is the refusal to acknowledge it exists, because that refusal sets you up for a very specific kind of disappointment. When you expect a relationship to operate on selfless loyalty alone, when you assume the other person's investment in you has nothing to do with what they receive in return, you constructed a version of the relationship that doesn't actually exist. And the moment reality fails to match that construction, you experience it as betrayal, when what actually happened was far more mundane. The other person's self-interest simply shifted, or was revealed, in a direction that no longer aligned with your needs. This is where honest observation becomes protective rather than cynical. If you can identify clearly and without judgment what someone actually gains from their relationship with you: companionship, status by association, financial benefit, emotional support, a sense of purpose, you gain something enormously valuable: the ability to predict how that relationship will behave under changing conditions. Relationships built on mutual, acknowledged benefit tend to be remarkably stable, precisely because both parties understand the terms. It's the relationships built on the fiction of pure selflessness that tend to collapse, without warning, because no one was ever tracking the actual exchange taking place beneath the sentiment. Consider how differently you might navigate your relationships if you simply asked, honestly, what does this person get from our connection, and does that benefit still exist? Not as an act of suspicion, but as an act of clarity. If a friendship is sustained partly by shared professional benefit, that's not a corruption of the friendship, it's simply one of its supporting pillars, and pillars can be reinforced, or they can weaken. If a romantic relationship is sustained partly by companionship, financial partnership, unema, or social validation alongside genuine affection, understanding that composition allows you to notice when one of those pillars shifts, rather than being blindsided when the relationship changes in response to a shift you never saw coming. It's because you refuse to look for it. There's a liberating quality to this honesty that people rarely expect going in. And once you stop demanding pure selflessness from others, you stop being disappointed by its absence. And you stop performing false selflessness yourself, which is its own kind of exhausting theater. You can engage in relationships as they actually are, exchanges of mutual benefit that also, often, contain real warmth, real care, real loyalty, without needing to pretend the self-interested component doesn't exist. This doesn't make the connection less meaningful. It makes it more honest, and honest relationships are far sturdier than ones propped up by a comfortable illusion neither party can maintain indefinitely. So here's the discipline worth adopting. Stop expecting selfless loyalty from people who never claim to be operating on those terms, and start paying attention to what's first actually being exchanged in every relationship you maintain. This isn't the end of trust. It's the beginning of trust that's grounded in something real, rather than trust extended toward a version of human nature that doesn't actually exist. See people clearly, self-interest and all, and you've never again mistake the ordinary shifting of someone's as priorities for a betrayal you couldn't have anticipated. You could have. You simply weren't willing, until now, to look. There's a test for friendship that most people never think to apply, largely because applying it requires waiting for a set of circumstances they'd rather avoid altogether. And yet this test is the only one that actually means anything. It isn't how someone behaves at your birthday dinner, or how warmly they greet you in a group setting, or how enthusiastically they engage with you when things are going well. Anyone can manage those moments. The real test of friendship is this. Does this person remain in your corner when there is absolutely nothing in it for them? Think about what makes this test so revealing. Most friendships are conducted, whether we notice it or not, under conditions of mutual benefit. There's status to be gained by association, entertainment to be had, favors to be traded, an audience present to witness the display of loyalty being performed. Under these conditions, almost everyone looks like a good friend, because good behavior costs nothing when it's being rewarded simultaneously. The difficulty and the diagnostic value only appears once you strip all of that away. No benefit, no audience, no advantage to be gained by standing beside you, and often some real cost involved in doing so. This is the only condition under which loyalty can actually be measured, because it's the only condition where loyalty and self-interest are forced to point in opposite directions. Consider what it actually asks of a person to remain loyal under these circumstances. It asks them to show up for you when doing so offers them nothing, no social credit, no reciprocal favor, no enhancement to their own reputation. It asks them to defend you when you're not in the room to know whether they did, when silence would have cost them nothing and support might cost them something. It asks them to stay present during your decline, your failure, your loss of status, precisely the moments when association with you stops being an asset and starts being, at best, neutral and at worst a liability. Very few relationships are ever built to survive this test, because very few relationships were ever required to face it. Most simply never get tested at all, which means most people are, in an important sense, wrong about the depth of their own friendships without realizing it. This is why the absence of benefit functions as such a precise instrument. Benefit obscures character. It makes generous behavior easy to perform and difficult to distinguish from genuine loyalty, because the two produce identical behavior right up until the benefit disappears. Remove the benefit, and only one of them survives. This is not a cynical framework designed to make you suspicious of everyone around you. It's simply an honest acknowledgement that character reveals itself most clearly under exactly the conditions most people spend their lives trying to avoid: difficulty, cost, absence of reward. There's a particular kind of clarity available to those willing to notice this, though it requires a certain discipline to actually apply it, rather than simply nodding along with the idea. It means paying close attention to how people behave, not when you're thriving, but when you're struggling, not when your presence enhances their standing, but when it might diminish it. It means noticing who reaches out during the quiet, difficult stretches that offer no social visibility, versus who only appears during the moments worth broadcasting. It means recognizing that warmth extended during convenient conditions tells you almost nothing, while warmth extended during inconvenient ones tells you almost everything. I want to note something important here, because this principle can easily curdle into something corrosive if misapplied. This isn't a call to manufacture hardship simply to test people, to deliberately create scarcity or crisis as some kind of loyalty audit. That approach treats relationships as experiments rather than connections, and it corrodes the trust from your side just as thoroughly as false friendship corrodes it from theirs. What's being described instead is a shift in attention, paying closer notice to how people behave during the difficult seasons that occur naturally in every life, rather than weighting your assessment of a friendship too heavily toward the easy seasons, which tell you comparatively little. And when you do find someone who passes this test, who remained present when nothing was in it for them, who defended you when defending you cost them something, who stayed when leaving would have been easier and equally invisible, understand what you're actually holding. That is rare. That is not something to take for granted simply because it arrived quietly, without spectacle, in a moment when no one else was watching to applaud it. So look honestly at the people around you, and ask yourself which of them have actually been tested by absence of benefit, and which have simply never been asked. Because the friendship that survives when there's nothing to gain is the only friendship that was ever actually proven at all. There's a particular kind of danger that most people never learn to fear properly, because our instincts are calibrated for the wrong threat entirely. We're taught from an early age to watch for enemies, people who announce their opposition, who compete openly, who make no secret of the fact that your interests and theirs don't align. And to be fair, this instinct serves a purpose. An open adversary is, in a strange way, a gift, because they've told you exactly where you stand. But the danger that actually does damage, the one that catches capable, intelligent people completely off guard, rarely wears the face of an enemy at all. It wears the face of a friend. Consider the fundamental asymmetry at work here. When you know someone opposes you, every subsequent interaction is filtered through appropriate caution. You watch what you share. You verify what you're told. You keep certain doors closed, certain vulnerabilities guarded, certain information withheld, because your instincts have correctly identified the relationship as adversarial. This vigilance, uncomfortable as it may be, is actually a form of protection. The enemy who shows their hand allows you to play defense intelligently, because you know, at minimum, which direction the threat is coming from. Now consider what happens when that same threat arrives wearing warmth instead of hostility. The false friend doesn't trigger your defenses, quite the opposite. They lower them. Every psychological mechanism you'd normally deploy against a threat remains dormant, because your mind has categorized this person as safe. You share what you wouldn't share with a stranger. You reveal ambitions, insecurities, plans you haven't yet made public, precisely because the relationship has been coded as trustworthy. And this is exactly what makes the false friend so much more dangerous than the open rival. They gain access to all the vulnerable information an enemy would have to work to extract, simply by never having to overcome your defenses in the first place. You handed it to them willingly, because you never knew you needed to defend against them at all. This is the deeper mechanism worth understanding. Betrayal by someone assumed to be an ally doesn't just cost you whatever concrete damage results from it. It costs you something more corrosive, the shock of discovering that your own perception was the vulnerability, that you were operating on false information the entire time you believed yourself informed. An open enemy's opposition confirms what you already suspected. A false friend's betrayal contradicts what you were certain you knew, and that contradiction is far more destabilizing because it doesn't just damage your position, it damages your trust in your own judgment going forward. There's a reason this pattern recurs throughout history, in every arena where stakes are high: politics, business, even the intimate spaces of family and friendship. The person who ultimately does the most damage is rarely the one who announced their rivalry. It's the one who smiled in the room, offered support in public, expressed loyalty convincingly, enough that suspicion never had a reason to activate, while quietly working against your interests the entire time, protected by the very appearance of friendship that kept you from ever looking closely. The mask isn't just concealment, it's active protection for the person wearing it, because as long as it holds, no one thinks to question what's underneath it. I want to be careful here, because this insight, taken too far, curdles into a corrosive paranoia that damages every relationship indiscriminately, treating warmth itself as evidence of concealment. That's not the lesson. Most smiles are exactly what they appear to be. Most warmth is genuine. The point isn't to suspect everyone who's kind to you. It's to understand that kindness alone, without the accumulated evidence of tested loyalty we discussed earlier, is not sufficient grounds for total, unguarded trust. The open rival requires vigilance, because their intention is visible. The false friend requires vigilance, precisely because their intention is not. And the only Real defense against that particular danger is refusing to let warmth alone substitute for evidence. This means holding a small, quiet reserve, even with people who present themselves warmly, not out of coldness, but out of the recognition that friendliness is easy to perform, and betrayal, when it comes from someone trusted completely, does more damage precisely because it was never anticipated. Keep some information close, regardless of how safe a relationship feels early on. Notice not just what people say, but whether their actions, over time, align with the warmth they display. Let trust expand as evidence accumulates, rather than granting it in full simply because someone was pleasant enough to lower your guard. Because in the end, it was never the enemy who could truly surprise you. Enemies, by definition, have already told you what to expect. It's the smiling face beside you, never once questioned, that holds the power to wound you in a place you never thought to protect. There's a habit most people carry into every new relationship without ever examining it, and it's worth naming plainly because it causes more damage than almost any other social instinct we possess. The habit of extending complete trust immediately, on the strength of nothing more than a good first impression, a shared sense of humor, an instinctive feeling of connection. We call this openness. We call it being trusting by nature, as though it were a virtue requiring no scrutiny. But look closely at what's actually happening, and you'll find something far less noble than generosity. You'll find recklessness simply wearing a more flattering name. Consider what complete trust actually is. It's the decision to grant someone access to your vulnerabilities, your resources, your reputation, your unguarded self, before they's demonstrated any capacity to handle that access responsibly. This isn't openness in the admirable sense. It's an absence of due diligence, dressed up as warmth because warmth feels better to describe than negligence. And the reason this distinction matters is that trust, unlike affection, isn't meant to be a feeling. It's meant to be a conclusion, one drawn from evidence accumulated over time through observation of how someone actually behaves when circumstances test them. Trust granted before that evidence exists isn't trust at all. It's a guess, dressed in trust's clothing, and guesses, however good they feel in the moment, carry no actual predictive power. Here's the principle worth internalizing. Trust should function exactly like any other valuable resource, built incrementally, expanded only as evidence justifies the expansion, and always subject to revision if that evidence changes. Think about how this operates in any domain where the stakes are taken seriously. No competent investor commits their entire portfolio to an unproven venture on the strength of a compelling pitch alone. They test with something small first. They watch how the investment performs under real conditions. They expand their commitment only as the evidence accumulates in favor of doing so. This isn't cynicism about the venture, it's simply intelligent risk management. And there is no reason relationships should be governed by a less careful standard than we've applied to money. And yet most people do exactly this. They commit fully, immediately, to relationships that haven't yet earned anything beyond a pleasant first few interactions. They share their deepest insecurities with someone they've known for a matter of weeks. They defend someone's character to others before that character has actually been tested by anything beyond convenience. They hand over trust in full, upfront, and then experience genuine confusion when that trust turns out to have been misplaced, as though the fault lies entirely with the other person's deception, rather than partly with their own failure to require evidence before extending something so valuable. This is where the incremental model becomes not just wiser, but genuinely protective. When trust is built gradually, when each new degree of openness is extended only after the previous degree has been honored, you create a system that reveals problems early, while the cost of being wrong is still small. If someone mishandles a minor confidence, you learn this before you've shared something that could genuinely harm you. If someone's stated loyalty doesn't match their actual behavior under the mildest of tests, you learn this before you've built your reputation or your resources around depending on them. The incremental approach doesn't just protect you from catastrophic betrayal, it surfaces the warning signs early enough that catastrophic betrayal becomes far less likely to occur in the first place. because you were never positioned to be catastrophically exposed to begin with. There's also something important here about what incremental trust does for the quality of your relationships. Beyond simple protection, trust that's earned gradually tends to be sturdier than trust that's granted immediately, precisely because it's been tested along the way, rather than assumed from the outset. The relationships that survive this process, the ones where each increment of trust was met with corresponding evidence of reliability, arrive at deep trust having actually verified that the depth is warranted. This is a fundamentally different foundation than trust extended purely on instinct, and it shows in the relationship's durability when real pressure eventually arrives, as it always does. I want to be clear about what this isn't. It isn't permanent suspicion, isn't withholding warmth or connection while you conduct some interminable audit of everyone you meet. Warmth can be immediate. Trust cannot, or at least trust that means anything cannot. You can be kind, open, and engaged with someone new while still keeping the more consequential mid-forms of trust. Your reputation, your vulnerabilities, your resources, reserved for the relationships that have actually demonstrated, through repeated evidence, that they can be handled responsibly. So examine how you've been extending trust throughout your life. Ask whether you've been building it the way anything valuable should be built, slowly, through evidence, with room to revise, or whether you've simply been handing it over in full, up front, and calling the resulting damage a betrayal, when it was, more honestly, a risk you never should have taken without first requiring proof. We arrive now at the conclusion of everything we've discussed tonight, and I want to address directly the fear that's likely been building throughout this entire speech. The fear that everything I do adds up to a life of isolation, that if relationships are built on convenience, if self-interest runs beneath every connection, if friendship is only proven in absence of benefit, if the warmest smiles can conceal the sharpest betrayals, if trust must be built with such deliberate slowness, then perhaps the only sane response is to withdraw entirely, to trust no one, to stand permanently alone. I want to correct that conclusion now, because it's not just wrong, it's a misreading of everything that came before it. This was never an argument for isolation. It was an argument for accuracy. There is a profound difference between standing alone because you're calm. Wes concluded no one is worth the risk, and standing with clear eyes because you're calm. Wes concluded no one is worth the risk, and standing with clear eyes because you're calm. So people you've never actually tested. The first is despair wearing the costume of wisdom. The second is simply what happens when you stop mistaking comfort for evidence and start requiring your relationships to actually earn the trust you extend to them. Consider the alternative most people choose instead, the wide circle, the large collection of friends, acquaintances, and allies, cultivated not because each one has proven themselves, but because a large circle feels safer than a small one. This is an illusion, and a costly one. A crowded room of people who have never been tested offers you the appearance of support without the substance of it. You can be surrounded by dozens of people and still be, in every way that matters, entirely alone. The moment real difficulty arrives, because none of those relationships were ever built to withstand difficulty in the first place. Quantity was never a substitute for quality here, and yet most people organize their entire social world as though it were. Now compare that to the smaller, harder-won circle, the handful of people who have actually passed the tests we've discussed tonight. The ones who remained present when there was nothing in it for them. The ones whose warmth was matched by consistent action, not just pleasant words. The ones who earned deeper trust incrementally, by honoring each smaller trust that came before it. This circle may be considerably smaller than the one you'd build through convenience and comfortable assumption, but what it lacks in size, it makes up for entirely in reliability, and reliability, when circumstances actually test it, is the only quality that was ever going to matter. This is the real distinction being drawn here, and it's worth stating with complete clarity. Solitude and clarity are not the same as loneliness. Loneliness is the absence of connection you actually want. Clarity is the presence of accurate information about the connections you have. You can be selective, careful, and appropriately guarded while still maintaining deep, genuine relationships. The difference is simply that those relationships have been earned, rather than assumed, tested rather than taken on faith. This isn't a smaller life, it's a more honest one, and honest lives, however much less crowded they may appear from the outside, tend to hold up considerably better under pressure than lives built on a wide network of untested assumptions. There's a kind of peace available here that most people never access, precisely because they're real to mind create. They're busy maintaining the appearance of a full social life to ever ask whether that fullness is actually load-bearing. When you stop needing everyone around you to be a proven ally, when you become comfortable holding some relationships at the appropriate distance until they're earned something closer, you free yourself from a particular kind of anxiety, the low-grade, constant vulnerability of depending on people you've never actually verified. That anxiety doesn't disappear when you ignore it. It simply waits, quietly, for the moment circumstances finally reveal what you'd assumed rather than confirmed. So here is what I want you to take from everything we've covered tonight. Stop measuring the health of your relationships by their number, and start measuring them by their evidence. Let go of the discomfort that comes with having a smaller circle, because that discomfort is simply the cost of trading illusion for accuracy, and it is, without exception, a trade worth making. The goal was never to trust no one. The goal was to trust precisely, to extend your regard only as far as it's actually been earned, and to hold, with quiet confidence, the small number of relationships that have genuinely proven themselves against the far larger number that never had to. Because in the end, a single person who has actually stood by you when it cost them something is worth infinitely more than a crowd who never once had to. Choose accuracy over comfort. Choose the few who are proven over the many who are merely assumed. That is not a smaller life. It is, in every way that matters, a far sturdier one.